Do you have ovulation bleeding? Does someone you know have ovulation bleeding? Or are you here to listen to a story of my suffering? Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be telling you guys about how I cured my ovulation bleeding. So what is ovulation bleeding? Ovulation bleeding is when you bleed during the ovulation part of your cycle, and it can depend on the individual, but it's generally about 2 weeks before your period starts or 2 weeks after your period ends. And the ovulation period can be 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. It kind of depends on the person. And the form of bleeding can be in like pink spotting, deep dark red blood, or like brown blood. Depends on the person. So I'm going to be telling you guys about my experience and everything that happened with me, and then how I came to discover how to cure it, or how I cured myself. So for full context, I have not experienced ovulation bleeding in over a year now. But it started for me about 2 years ago in the fall, and it happened on and off for about 1 full year. So when it started for me, I was getting a lot of weird stomach pains, like in the lower abdominal area, and that was followed by ovulation bleeding. Like my stomach just wasn't feeling very normal, it wasn't feeling very good, and then when the ovulation bleeding started, I was extremely concerned. What I initially thought was that I was just getting my period extra early, and I was thinking that that was really weird, but the period never truly started. And so what I ended up doing was I called the nurse hotline. I don't know why, but they kept thinking that I was pregnant, and at the time I was single and like have not touched a soul in like many months, and so like there's just no way, there's like no way. But after it had been going on for a couple of days, I was getting pretty concerned, and this is like the first month that had happened. I was getting pretty concerned because just again, it had never happened to me before. I am in my mid to late 20s. If I feel like it happened, it would have happened like much earlier. So what I ended up doing was I went to urgent care. Keep in mind, this is during like COVID times when most people hadn't even gotten their first vaccine yet. So going to any like medical facility was like super scary for me, and I was like, this seems risky, like I don't want to get COVID, but at the same time, like I need to know what's happening to me. So I went into urgent care. I saw the urgent care doctor after waiting a couple hours, and he had no idea what was going on, but he said it could have been a couple things. It could have been endometriosis, it could have been PCOS, it could have been I was secretly pregnant. I don't know, he said it could have been a lot of things. So what he did end up doing was sending me to get a transvaginal ultrasound, but he said that if I were to make an appointment with an OB-GYN, which I should, she would want to see the transvaginal ultrasound report. He reassured me that it seemed like everything was perfectly normal and that I should just make these follow-up appointments and go from there. So that's exactly what I did. I wasn't able to make an appointment with the OB-GYN that I wanted to see for I think 2 months later, so that's what I did. I did the transvaginal ultrasound beforehand, so she would have it before I go. And I don't know if any of you guys know what a transvaginal ultrasound is, but it's like pretty scary, and you guys can, I'll just leave you guys to look it up on the internet. It was completely painless, it was like completely fine, but it was kind of scary. When I went to see my OB-GYN, she was very reassuring in letting me know that ovulation bleeding is perfectly normal, it happens to some people and it's totally fine. She looked at the transvaginal ultrasound and she looked at my blood tests and everything, and she said that I am perfectly healthy and everything looked normal to her in the ultrasound and my blood tests and everything like that. And she also said that it could just be my body kind of regulating any leftover, I don't know, period blood in my body and just like trying to get it out. But she also denied any of the things that the urgent care doctor said could have been a possibility, which is like PCOS and endometriosis, or like pregnancy. But I feel like at that appointment she really kept pushing that ovulation bleeding could be a really normal thing, and that it happens to people, and that this could just be what my body is like from now on. And I really didn't want to accept that as my new reality. So I went to see another OB-GYN. She was not as highly rated, she didn't have as many reviews, but I was like, whatever, I just want to get a second opinion. And I went to see a second OB-GYN, and she pre-diagnosed me with PCOS. She was like, I definitely think you have PCOS. We're gonna do the blood test to like confirm and make sure of all these things, but I can pretty much say that it's PCOS. And hearing that was concerning, but I really didn't think I had it, especially after my last OB-GYN said that I didn't have it. So I went back to the original OB-GYN, and then I went to see my primary care physician, and I redid all the blood tests. I did the blood tests needed to check if I had PCOS. My original OB-GYN looked at the ultrasound again and had a second pair of eyes look at it again. And after the blood test and looking at the ultrasounds, both doctors, so my original OB-GYN and my PCP, were like, you don't have PCOS. And so I was like, okay, I don't have it. During this entire time, I was still having the ovulation bleeding on and off. Some months I would have it, some months I wouldn't have it, some months would be lighter, some heavier, or sometimes I would just not have it at all. So I went back to the Yelp page of the Obgyn that diagnosed me with PCOS, and I wrote her 1-star review because what was she doing? And I decided to take matters into my own hands, and I did 2 things. So this is the part when I start to tell you guys a little bit about my healing process and journey and figuring out how to heal my body. The first of the 2 things I did was I tried to understand what changes I made before this started happening and kind of A/B test to see if any of these things were triggering me. And you have to know that this was a long process of like doing a lot of one thing and seeing if I get ovulation bleeding and doing another thing and seeing if I get ovulation bleeding. And so here are the list of things that I found could have potentially been triggering me. The first one was spicy food. Like, I generally don't love eating super spicy food. Like, I find it really painful. But during the pandemic, I found that I was eating more at home, cooking more at home, and I would just add a little bit of spice in all of my cooking. So that was the first thing that I A/B tested and found that triggered me. The second thing was dairy. Before my ovulation bleeding started, there was a pretty long stint of like 3 or 4 months when I was drinking a lot of milk. And I normally don't drink milk. If I do drink milk, I'll drink almond milk or oat milk, and I don't even drink coffee. Sometimes I'll drink tea and I'll add a splash of like almond or oat milk. But during the pandemic, I found myself eating a lot of like cookies and brownies and stuff, and I would want to wash it down with milk like a child. And I found that it was mostly milk and not really cheeses or like ice cream and stuff like that. Since then, I pretty much have just cut out milk entirely. I'll occasionally have some if I order a milk tea outside. The third one is alcohol, and I've never been a big drinker. Like, I don't really enjoy drinking that much. I like to do like social drinking. But during the pandemic, my team at work, they've been doing like virtual happy hours where people will have a glass of wine or a can of beer, and then we'll just chat and have fun and like play some games. And so during one of those happy hours, I decided to buy a bottle of wine, and I'm the only one in this household that is drinking wine. And so I finished the entire bottle, not in one sitting. I probably had a glass every other day until the bottle was gone. And that's like the most alcohol I've ever drank. But that's also something that was different, and I realized after doing a little bit of testing could have possibly been a trigger. And the last one was stress. So during the pandemic, I feel like everyone was a little bit stressed about something, whether it's like paranoia of getting sick or having gotten sick, or your friends or family getting sick, or the pressures of getting laid off, or just so many things. We were all just very stressed, and I think stress was a huge trigger for me, and that's something that I'm actively trying to manage now. So that was another huge thing that I'm just like, that was definitely something that could have caused this. So those were the things that I identified as like potential triggers for my ovulation bleeding. The second thing that I did was I went to see an Eastern doctor. I went to see a traditional Chinese doctor. I saw him for about 3 months. I went to see him every other week. I tried acupuncture for the first time. I drank a disgusting bag of tea 3 times a day for the entirety of like a 2 to 3 month period. And the tea really like changed my body and made me like gain a lot of weight, especially like in this area. It just made me like just like a little bit bigger. Like, I used to pride myself in having like a really small waist, and now that is like totally gone. But going to see the traditional Chinese doctor was, I think, a very pivotal moment in my healing, because he taught me a lot of things about like yin and yang and the balance of our bodies and the things that can make us too heated, so too yang. So the things that can make you too yang and possibly lead to bleeding are like dairy, alcohol, and spicy food. So like all the things that I mentioned earlier. And there were some other things that he also mentioned, like not to drink any cold water, making sure that I get enough rest every night, and different foods to eat that would be a more balanced diet for me. So I stopped seeing the traditional Chinese doctor after about 3 months because, one, it was really expensive. 2, he was not super close to me proximity wise, so driving to him took a long time, and their hours that they were open were very limited. 3, because I was gaining weight in this area and it was making me really mad and insecure. And 4, because I felt like the ovulation bleeding was starting to taper off, and I was starting to really understand what I needed to do moving forward. So how I healed moving forward is that I tried to live a more active and healthy lifestyle. I cut out spicy food, dairy, and alcohol. Like, obviously I have it in moderation, but I generally don't have those things in my house, so I don't reach for them. I don't drink icy cold water anymore, and I generally try to watch my stress levels cycles and manage it by taking walks, going to the gym, journaling, meditating, therapy, and all of those good things. So what ended up happening was I stopped seeing the traditional Chinese doctor, and I did all those things that I just mentioned earlier, and the ovulation bleeding eventually tapered off. It became once every other month, it became once every 2 months, to once every 3 months, to eventually going away completely. And it's been over a year now since I've experienced ovulation bleeding, which I think is awesome. I want to caveat that I am young and my body is like forever healing itself, so at the end of the day, what could have really healed me is just time. But I truly think that there's always some steps you can take to make your health situation a little bit better for yourself. Health is wealth, and at the end of the day, there isn't a time when you will feel more anxious or more stressed than when you are sick or when you or your loved one is feeling sick. Preventative care is super important, and yeah, so that was my experience with my ovulation bleeding. I hope that you guys aren't experiencing it too, but if you are, hopefully the things that I shared were a little bit helpful. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you guys haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do so, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!